Hello, folks. Welcome to Between Awesome and Disaster. This is your host, Will Carey. I appreciate you tuning in. I hope you are doing well. I hope that you had an excellent Thanksgiving. I am recording this for future release, so by the time you hear this, I will be in San Diego, California, on for business, doing the thing, having a taco or two or five, and living that West Coast, ever tempting California lifestyle. My guest on the show today is my longtime good friend, Kevin Froleiks. Kevin and I met doing stand-up comedy in New York City. Kevin, over the last few years since lockdown, has begun releasing very witty comedy music. Not even comedy music. I call it legit music with clever lyrics because he is a naturally witty, verbose kind of man whose work I enjoy. And this year, he set a goal for himself to release 4 full-length albums, and he is here today to talk about the newest one that came out on December 1st. It is called We Have Your Son, But Please Take Him Back. It is an alt-rock 90s inspired album, so if you're a fan of like kind of heavy rock like Smashing Pumpkins, that 90s era of power pop, there's a broad range of 90s rock influences on my buddy Kevin's new album, and I am here to talk to him about this year-long project, as well as the album that I was able to listen to ahead of release, that I was very intrigued by because I love Kevin's kind of acerbic takes on the society as a whole. Reminds me a lot of his stand-up when he and I were very heavily like in the trenches doing stand up multiple times every night, which we did for a number of years. And I was very excited to talk to him about how he creates music as someone else who began creating music at the height of lockdown as well. So thank you all again so much for being here. There are links in the description, but you can stream the album as well as all of his music, which is under his stage name, Goodbye Charlemagne. I will have links for it in the description. If you want to check it out, you can get Goodbye Charlemagne everywhere you get your music. And let's talk to my friend Kevin Froleiks. But I mean, man, I haven't seen you. Well, I think I saw you. Well, obviously, I saw you at Corey's wedding, but I don't know if I've bumped into you since. So it's been a while. Has it been like?
That's been a year, if that's true. Yeah, and it might be true because we were I mean, after that wedding was what, September,
Yeah.
and then it was holidays, so we were both probably out of town or busy with family stuff, and then yeah, and then in the spring and summer, fall, Lisa and I are kind of going back and forth between New York and New England and living that life. So
Yes. You're putting as I think I've said on stage a couple times. You're putting your Ted Kaczynski cabin together.
getting ready for it. Yeah. Yeah, we got that cabin right at the beginning of the pandemic when we were like, oh, cool, everyone's panic selling cabins, and so we can afford to do a thing we've always talked about doing when we were significantly older. And it's like, oh, we can afford to do this now, and it'll be great because the pandemic will be over in a couple of weeks. And then so glad we got it because otherwise we would have been stuck in a cramped apartment like everybody else. But it made such a difference. So yeah, just in a rustic cabin in Maine.
Yeah. So that was something you always had wanted to
We've
do.
talked about it. Yeah, we've always, because me and Lisa were both from New Hampshire and have always wanted to like not move back, but always like have a be able to go back and live the lake life, and just never wanted anything fancy. Just like, oh, if we just had like a little cabin on a lake, like that'd be perfect. And then pandemic happened, and all the old timers were like, well, we got to get rid of our cabins because they thought the world was ending, and it kind of did for a couple years. But yeah, it was a lucky seems kind of a perverse way of putting it, but yeah, it was timing that worked out in our favor.
No, yeah, absolutely. I remember those first couple years of the pandemic where I was just I felt pretty honestly chill about the world ending. I was just sort of like, well, if it happens, I guess it's just going to happen. I was really looking for anything to kind of like keep keep excited about the state of the world, or at least have stuff to look forward to when I couldn't leave the apartment. So I just leaned really hard into the podcast. I was going crazy. I was
Hmm.
doing like five, like one every day basically for a
Oh
little
wow.
while. And then I finally, of course, got that EP, that serious EP recorded, which was exciting. And
Hmm.
you dude, and because I want to turn this back around to you, as long as I've known you, we've known each other for almost 10 years, like over 10 years now, I think, right?
At this
And
point, yeah.
so I've always known you as like a music person as well, and I've always been like a music person who also did comedy because I was a music person first. Um, and I'm sure a million people have always asked you, why don't you try to combine the two? Um, but I feel like I feel like you're very great, like very publicly embracing what I think you see as like your, which I don't see it as that. You're this like the trail out of comedy into doing very funny and witty music, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I always did like music stuff in when I was a kid, like middle school, high school, marching band, concert band, all that stuff. So I've like studied music since I was like 10 years old. Um, and, you know, would learn songs on guitar or banjo or whatever. And so always did that. But then when I did stand up, I just wanted to do regular stand up and never thought to like combine them. And I still don't really think about combining them. But then when well, I had done like at this point, like 7 years ago, wrote a musical with my friend and yours, Patrick J. Riley. We wrote Great
Yes,
Frontier.
yes.
Yeah, which I think I talked about on this with you, like when that was first a thing. I think that was the one that we did like on the roof of our old apartment together.
Yes, I remember that. I remember that so well.
Yeah,
Yeah, we've podcasted in the oddest places, but I remember very vividly us recording on the roof
yeah,
of
and
our
it
old
was like the
place.
hottest day of August, and we were both just like sweating up there for like an hour and a half because, yeah, we were just talking about a million things. But yeah, but that was like working on that. I was like, oh, I still remember how to do music because I hadn't like seriously done any music thing for like 6 or 7 years at that point, like since college, and then wrote a whole musical and was like, oh, I still remember like theory and I remember how to, I remember how notes are supposed to look on a page and was able to do that. And then didn't do too much else with music other than that. And then the pandemic hit and kind of similar to you focusing on the podcast, I was like, oh, maybe I'll just go back to music because I had been doing stand up regularly, and the year before the pandemic, I was on a UCB team, like writing sketches every month, which took up most of the creative time that I had, and it was great. And then it just went away all at once, and I was like, I have never not left the house this much, like as long as I'd been in New York. And you know this too. It's like when you're here to like work on comedy or anything creative, you're like constantly like getting up, going to work, doing open mics or shows or whatever it is like after work, and then you get back at like 11:30 and you eat something really unhealthy and then go to bed and then wake up and do it all again. And that was like nearly a decade of my life living in New York. And then I had none
Yeah.
of it, and I was like, oh, maybe I'll go back to music stuff. And I had written like just in April 2020, when we all thought it was only going to be a couple of weeks of the pandemic, I wrote a comedy folk album called 10 Songs Too Many, where all the songs were about like quarantine and the pandemic. And it was very much just like, whatever idea I had that was, and all I was thinking about, like everybody was thinking about, was the world is ending. It's the pandemic. It's, yeah, we're all drinking way too much. We're all,
Yeah.
having these like stress nightmares. And so like all the songs were kind of about that. Um, and then slowly over the like next couple of years, when comedy kind of didn't come back or the pandemic lasted a little bit longer, I just kept kind of working on music. And then that led us to 2023 where I was like, you know, whenever I like do sit down and work, I had done like a couple albums. I did a couple just like very stripped down folk albums where I didn't really know what I was doing in terms of recording. And so,
Hmm.
and then as I kind of figured out how to like track like drums, even though they're just drum machines, because I don't have a drum set and I don't I don't have the wherewithal or the foresight to figure out like how do I get a drum part written for a drummer to like record it separately and send it to me. And so I've just been pre-recording like electronic drums and hoping that they don't sound too, you know, too fake or whatever. But um, you know, after doing like a couple of albums on my own and getting a little bit better, I was like, you know, when I actually do sit down and work on these, I'm probably only taking like 3 months to do it. I would just like procrastinate and like I would work on a song and then a month would go by and I'd work on another song and then like, you know, 10 months later it's like, oh, I can put out this thing that I've been working on. And I was like, maybe if I actually like committed to it, I could maybe try to do 4 albums in a year. I'm not doing anything else creatively, so that's what I did this year was wrote 40 songs for 4 albums in 1 year and just put one out every 3 months, which is a lot. I probably won't do that again, but it was fun to do this year.
Yeah, I love these like we oh because I still do that too. We set these like year long
Yeah.
creative projects for ourselves. So it sounds like you were like really going through it in terms of like existential despair at the height of the pandemic.
There was definitely like, it was weird because like in the beginning, like I definitely felt almost like a relief that like, oh, for the first time, like I don't have to do anything. Like it had just been just the busyness that comes with working a full-time job and also having like dreams outside of that and like
Sure.
wanting to work on stuff that is, you know, creatively fulfilling, like and that grind of like you're out late, you're waking up early, you're always tired and, you know, doing shows, writing shows, rehearse like it was like it does wear on you. And so when it went away, I was like, oh, I haven't been like this relaxed in a long while. But that soon that and there was also a moment like going around the city where like everybody kind of had to slow down and everybody was kind of like anxious all the time. I was like, oh, everybody now understands what it's like to be me, an anxious introvert who like this is kind of an ideal situation minus the, you know, thousands of people getting sick and dying every single day. That part not the best, but it
Yeah,
was
yeah, that was bad.
yeah, but it was like it was surreal to like go outside and like the city was quiet. Like I was when we still didn't really know like, you know, how should we wear 2 masks? Is a bandana enough? Should I be wearing latex gloves when I go? Are we wiping down our groceries? Like we didn't know. Like things were we just really didn't know. But I was like biking around with like 2 bandanas wrapped around because I wanted to see the city when it was like shut down and like Sixth Avenue was empty. I was like riding up the middle of Sixth Avenue. Like there's no cars on the road. Everybody's most people had like left the city. Like the people at least that for the most part are like working in
That
these like
could, yeah.
financial, yeah, if they could, and like FIDI and all the, you know, ritzy business districts are mostly, you know, upstate or Connecticut, New Jersey, you know, the bridge and tunnel crowd that they've moved to the suburbs because they've got their little mansions out there. So it was like deserted. And like that was honestly like that was a cool, surreal experience that was also terrifying, but like, you know, that was unique. After the novelty of all that kind of wore off, I was like, oh, like, what am I doing like I had no other it was the first time I didn't have like an easy creative outlet so I
Yeah.
was kind of starting from scratch like trying to figure out like I'd never written songs before. I'd never like sat down and recorded music seriously, so it was like kind of starting at square one with a new thing and trying to figure it out little by little. But yeah, there was
Hmm.
some existential, you know, identity crisis trying to figure out what to do.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And it's helpful to I feel I do the same thing where it's like I really need things to kind of immerse myself in
Mhm.
when like the voice in the back of my head starts talking too much. Because I'm pretty similar to you. I didn't want to like start I did some Zoom shows, and but I was
Mhm.
not doing like I was not interested in like the outdoor like cloth over the microphone thing or bring my own
Oh
microphone.
yeah.
I just did. It took me a while to feel okay doing with doing that, or to be back on stage. Like I've done shows since, and it
Mhm.
feels great. Like it feels real, like a real joy to do sets and to play shows because I had a few shows with my old band that I would do. Um, so I relate to this sort of like dive into a project, and similarly home recording. And I would love to talk about this a bit with you. Um, I had not recorded, like tried to record at home in a long time, so I was very excited and impressed with how far technology had come. Like I don't know what you use. Like I've used Easy Drummer, which is great for making a song feel like a real song as opposed to a demo. But like, what were you like teaching yourself when you were first diving into this like stripped down folk stuff that you had started doing?
The first stuff I was recording on, and I still have it, but I in college had bought a digital like multi-tracker, like a like hardware, like a separate digital unit that you put a memory card in and could record up to 8 tracks. It was a
Like a
Fostex
Tascam?
MR8 Mach 2, like a Tascam. It was a Fostex and it was a digital. By the time I was like getting into this, I was like a few people had those cassette ones, like the 4 track, like Porta Studio that Tascam makes, where it's like you can record 4 tracks to a cassette, and it was like really cool, easy to use, and they were like $100 at the time. And now they're like the resale value if you have one of those. Like people are selling them for like 300 to 500 bucks. It's crazy because they don't make these analog ones anymore. But I bought this digital one, which in hindsight was a better investment because even when it would just sit on a shelf, while I was doing comedy and not really being used, it doesn't degrade like analog parts do or anything. So, and that's when I had an old podcast called Let's Read Together, and I recorded it all on that, and then would transfer the audio files down to a computer. So I was using that for like the first song I did was a song called "Working from Home" about working from home, and it was like a Springsteen style anthem about like a factory gets shut down because of the pandemic, but it's okay because everyone can work from home. um, it was like a tweet that I had made, and then like when boredom struck, I was just playing my guitar and I like wrote a whole song, and then I was like, oh, let me record this, and I recorded it on that. But then yeah, so I had this multi-track thing, and that's all I was really using. So that whole first album was just guitar, banjo, acoustic guitar, acoustic banjo, and me singing. And I think on a couple of them, I did figure out how to like get my laptop. Like I would open up GarageBand and have like an upright bass sound on there, but it was just feeding into the multi-tracker just because I was just I had no idea how to do anything, so I was just figuring it out the best way I could. But I didn't
Uh-huh.
know how to like record in sections or anything, so it was literally like I would learn the whole song all the way through, play it, and very like analog way you did it, which was like you play the whole song on guitar, okay, go back to the beginning, now play the whole song like singing, and then add the banjo, and then add this on it. So that's how I did the whole first album, or the first, yeah, the whole first album was done that way. The second one, I started using that multi-tracker as like a preamp almost, but had figured
Mm-hmm.
out I've only used GarageBand for everything that I've done because it's free and I have it, and I've been using GarageBand, or I've looked at it like since high school, so it's like I at least understand it. And there's like so many, little forums out there where you can get it can do pretty much everything. I never felt the need to like get the Pro Tools or any of the ones that are quote unquote legit, because it's like I'm not trying to record anything too crazy here. I just want it to,
Right.
sound good. And so like the drums, well, once I figured out how to do drums, and like GarageBand has a cool feature where you can say like, okay, the first 8 measures are the intro, and then there's a verse that like you can section it out, so then you can actually like plug in drum loops for what you want each section to sound like. And I've
Yeah.
gotten pretty good at like, finding a drum loop, but then you can add fills in certain places so it actually feels a little bit more natural.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, it's all just been GarageBand, and I usually, I have the song written, and I at least know the like chord changes and how long each section should be. But I'm not a drummer, and the drums are kind of, I try to make sure that the synthetic instruments are kind of more just in the background for vibes and to sound right, so that like the instruments I actually do play are more in the forefront, so that if somebody
Right.
listens to it, they're like, oh, this guy does know what he's doing, and it's not, totally just like garage band loops or things like that, which, you know, I've heard some like quote unquote comedy music where it's like, oh, these are just like the samples from garage. Even Bo Burnham did a whole song with garage band loops for, I think, one
Hmm.
of his specials. But yeah, I was like, no, I actually want to like write the songs, but I want it to sound more like I had a full band. But I also don't want to pay a lot of money to do that.
No, yeah, absolutely. Kind of like navigating that, and then once you like learn how to like tweak the drums just enough,
Yeah.
it sounds pretty natural. And like especially I feel like for the kind of stuff you do, because I've always known you as like very much like into like the classics, like very like vintage kind of sounding music. Like not a ton of the stuff that I know you listen to as like a prog rock kind of dude,
Yeah.
folk kind of guy. Uh, with the exception, I don't know. You don't strike me as someone who's like a nerd for Dream Theater. Like a lot of that stuff, the sort of warmth and imperfections of it, I think, kind of add to the overall vibes.
Hmm.
And the drums really just need to exist to like again to me drums make it feel like a real song even like when we're
Yeah.
just doing like loops and demos.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I do enjoy some Dream Theater, but mostly just scenes from a memory, Metropolis Part Two. But a lot of it, as much of a prog nerd as I am, that, a lot of Dream Theater or that era of music in general, like everything always just sounds so overproduced. I think so. The drumming is incredible. Like the Dream Theater, all of them are amazing, but it's, I wasn't trying to do Dream Theater. I wasn't trying to sound like a bunch of Berkeley grads who were showing off to each other. So yeah,
Sure.
yeah, a lot of the stuff that I really enjoy is, I was born 45 years old, so like it's all classic. Classic rock stuff was what I was listening to in high school when everybody else was listening to like emo and pop punk, and like the Killers' first album came out, and I was listening to like Zeppelin 2 and not understanding why nobody else was on my wavelength. But yeah, so the albums that I or the music that I was doing was a lot of it kind of, I guess it follows like a natural progression. Like it is all very like singer songwritery, so that's why I think like I started with folk, and I've always loved like the '60s folk music, so I think I that's why I started with that, and then it just kind of got more complicated, but it always is very much like I want people to actually hear the lyrics, and if they follow along the story, like they enjoy it. It's there's not a lot of like noodling around solos as much as I love prog rock that does a lot of noodling around solos. It's yeah, so it's like this year the albums I did were all like I did like decade themes and from the '60s to the '90s. So I did like a '60s garage rock and then a '70s disco and then an '80s synth pop, and then the one that's coming out next is a '90s like alternative rock type of album. So which is probably the most like I was getting into like Nirvana in like the early 2000s because that's when I was 12 years old and heard Nirvana for the first time, and then found out
Hmm.
Kurt Cobain died. But it was a rough day. I was like, oh, this is great. We should. What do they have that's more recent? They're like nothing because he died and the band. It's Foo Fighters now, and I was like, oh, all right, well, that'll do, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, the Foo Fighters are good, so there was something that you had to
There was
continue
something,
on.
yeah.
I that makes total sense to me because when I was listening to the previews of your new album, I I heard like a lot of like fuzz tones. Like you must have gotten a Big Muff or something. Like I heard a lot of like Smashing Pumpkins kind of guitar riffage, and that sort of like
Good
really
ear.
that sort of like kind of fuzzed out sort of like vaguely shoegazy thing. But
I do have the a Big Muff overdrive, or yeah, whatever, overdrive distortion, whatever it is. My wife got it for me for Christmas the other year. Not only is it a Big Muff distortion, it is the pumpkin pie Smashing Pumpkins Big
I knew
Muff.
it.
And so yeah, and I was very much going for that like Siamese dream, that fuzz in the background, and even like Nevermind it has a ton of that all over it. And yeah, and it was very much just like a texture that I was like, well, that has to be in there. But then also there's a lot of stuff in the '90s that was like it almost reminds me of like this. It kind of goes back to like 60s singer songwriter, like with uh, like the Breeders. I got really into the Breeders and the Lemonheads when I was working on this one, and
Hmm.
like so much of it, I was like, oh, so much of these songs could easily be like by the Byrds or like those very like singer-songwritery type of like folk rock groups, like a Crosby, Stills, Nash. It like had that kind of song structure to it. So it was a lot of yeah, just the twang, and then like REM is all twangy kind of guitars. So it was like that twangy guitar, but with also that Billy Corrigan rage in the cage underneath.
Which makes sense to me because that was like the music of like all the 90s bands youth was like the
Yeah.
60s kind of
Yeah.
protest music, and a lot of that punk stuff like from the Seattle grunge era, because Nirvana are a punk band. I think when you
Totally.
really get down to it, like
Hmm.
obviously they didn't really enjoy this more self-indulgent stuff of the 70s, so I still feel like they had a soft spot for the more like stripped down kind of protesty
Mm.
kind of music that was coming out of the 60s. So that connection makes a lot of sense to me. Like I remember the Vines before their lead
Mm.
singer kind of wrecked his career. Uh, very much was like we have 90s grunge songs, we have 60s folk songs.
Yeah, yeah. And there's even some like the the Breeders' Last Splash album, which just turned 30 years old, and I just heard it for the first time. There's so many bands that like even though I was alive but I was like just too young and like missed a lot of these albums, like unless they were some major hit, or if I had a friend with an because I was the oldest, so like I didn't have an older brother to be like, oh, you should listen to this. So it was like if I had a friend with an older brother that's how I found the Meat Puppets was like somebody was like, "Oh, if you like Nirvana, this this is the best songs from their MTV Unplugged. It's all on Meat Puppets too." So like listening to a lot of that, but yeah, like the Breeders have like just a acoustic country song at the end of it, and so does the Lemonheads on "It's a Shame About Ray," and like even Nirvana had "Polly," which might as well just be a three chord folk song. And I think with all those genres, like I would do like a deep dive in each genre when it's like, I know I want to, like, I love this decade for this genre of music. So let me go deep into like all the bands I know and find some other bands. And when I did like the 70s, it was like, oh, like, sure, like 70s disco was kind of in response to like the 60s rock and roll. It gets less counterculture and becomes like very aggressively mainstream and becomes less about like, you know, doing drugs alone in your house and like come do party drugs and dancing and all this stuff that wasn't really synonymous with the psychedelic and garage rocky stuff, which was more that early punk. And then the 80s comes around and it's like rejecting some of the like funkiness of the 70s and gets kind of more like technological. And it's like it still has like the
Hmm.
synthesizers, but it's very like quantized and very on the beat and doesn't deviate from it as much. But then like 90s comes along and is just like no more of this like process stuff. Let's get back to just guitars and all the things like that. So it's interesting how it like when you listen in to like a specific decade and nothing else for 3 months, and then you switch it, you realize like probably what it felt like if you were actually alive during that time. And if you were a kid in 1975 and then in your 20s in 1985, you would probably also notice like that shift as disco died and like hair metal and synth pop sort of come out of the ashes of that, and then grunge and alt rock kind of come out of the ashes of that.
Yeah, and you can see like the beginnings and then the co-option and the decline of each of
Mm-hmm.
those scenes. So was your plan from the beginning for this year of albums to do specific decades? Because that's a lot, you're covering a lot of ground stylistically, and a lot of ground stylistically, and I commend you for this, that I was not aware that you were familiar with to the point where you could play and write it.
I didn't know if I could, but I did set the goal. It was like a January 2nd New Year's resolution. And I think I do want to find the tweet before the end of the year so that I can like quote tweet it and like, hey, I did it because I did actually complete it. And I'm really proud of it. But at the beginning, the tweet was like, I'm probably going to regret this, but I think I'm going to do this coming 2023, 4 new albums. And I committed to like, I might have changed up some of the genres here and there, but I'm pretty sure that I had said like like 60s garage rock, 70s disco, 80s synth pop, 90s alt rock. I might have said like 90s grunge or like, switch the genres on, but I did commit to like an album for each of these decades, and it would be like one genre, one decade represented by each one. And I picked genres that I enjoy, but not necessarily that I knew a ton about, like disco and even garage rock. Like those were kind of blind spots. Like I had like a couple albums of garage rock that it's like, oh, I really like these '60s very mono, bands. Blues Magoos was a big one that I really loved, and they have an album called Psychedelic Lollipop that is
Uh-huh.
just as 1960s as it sounds, and it's great. But I was like, oh, that kind of sound where it's like literally just like five kids with long hair in their garage. They're all wearing suits, and that's the band. And but disco, like other than kind of the novelty of a lot of disco songs, like there was, I don't know. Do you remember like between like the Electric Six, who are still one of my favorite bands, but like early 2000s, like with Electric Six and like Men, Women, and Children, a couple others, like there was like a mini disco revival almost for like the mid 2000s, like early mid 2000s, where bands were like bringing back this very disco-y sound, and it didn't take off. It wasn't like 90s like the swing revival, but there were
Right.
a weird amount of bands that all of a sudden had like a disco beat and like that octave bass line style happening, and then it kind of went away. But that in high school, me and a friend of mine, we would drive around and like we had bought like disco and funk compilation CDs for in like the $5 bin, and we
Uh-huh.
would just drive around listening to that stuff. So admittedly, I got into the disco. I had the disco idea just because I was like, well, I want it to be really, really 70s, and I think I wanted to try to go for glam rock now that I think about it, but it turns out like it's just a hard sound I couldn't really replicate it as well, like because it was like Bowie is so ahead of the time and also drawing on so much from like the 50s. Like so much of Bowie is like rooted in that doo-wop type of stuff, but it's also super
Yeah.
forward thinking. So it's, even though it's like this all came out in the 70s, like it was hard to pick out specific tropes to sort of build an album around when I was listening to like T-Rex and Bowie and New York Dolls, like so much. It was so all over the place. And then the things that I kept finding, I was like, oh, that's the 70s, was like the Bowie songs that went really, really disco. And so then I started listening to more disco stuff, and specifically found albums that were produced by this Italian producer named Giorgio Moroder, who did like all of Donna Summer's albums. He did a couple of his own albums. He also did two albums by the band Sparks, who are one of my favorite bands. So I like listened to the
Hmm.
Sparks disco albums and the Donna Summers like Bad Girls, and she has an album called Once Upon a Time, which is just like a disco double album concept album that is just what if the story of Cinderella was all disco music, and it's amazing. It's an amazing album, and like that those albums, the Donna Summer ones in particular, like the thing I noticed was just sort of like the types of sounds that came in. Like there's synths, but it's not 80s synths. It's very like that synth string type of 70s vibe that you would see in like a Studio 54 montage in like a movie. But then also the thing that really struck me was like, oh, every single song doesn't end. It just like bleeds into the next one way or another. Like the way an actual disc jockey at a club would actually like spin one record into the next. So I was like, oh, I need to have them all fade into each other. And then between that and having like octave bass lines and the wah wah like funk funk guitar going in the
Yeah,
background, that
the waka waka, yeah,
yeah, the
yeah,
Shaft theme,
exactly.
the Shaft song, yeah, yeah.
Well, no, and that's like the most like I think universally identifiable like 70s music is that sound. So I
Yeah.
think your instincts were pretty dead on there. And like 70s bass is very interesting and cool bass to
Hmm.
play. It's very like bass and drum kind of driven music. And then so to kind of bring this to up to your this upcoming album, which what's the release date on this?
It will be out on December 1st.
December 1st. Okay. Coming into the 90s, cuz now this is where you and I have a bit more overlap. Um
Yeah. And
in
it's also the
terms
decade that I actually grew up with. So I found this to be like the easiest one to write. And that could also be because I was like working really, really fast the rest of the year. But then I got to a decade where I was actually like alive and consuming and enjoying music. So I was like, oh, this is like a sound that I don't have to do a ton of research for. And I just did a deep dive, like purely out of enjoyment. And it wasn't as much homework as
Hmm.
the other decades where I was like, I need to feel like I was actually there listening to these decades. And yeah, so we probably have a lot more as children of the 80s, 90s, we probably have a lot more overlap here.
Oh no, absolutely. So, like we were talking about the Smashing Pumpkins earlier. That's pretty apparent through like that heavily distorted guitar. I also think, and this might sound a little crazy as well, like because when you mentioned Sixpence None the Richer, some of these songs like Hot Goss is one of the ones that I think very much like a power pop kind of chord progression. I hear that on
Mm,
Hot Goss. I hear it on uh, Blonde Wig on a Broomstick, which also
mm.
very clever turn of phrase. Very almost like that's something that like I feel like my dad would say. Oh, she's a
Like as a
blonde wig on.
slur,
Well, no,
like as an
just as a
insult to somebody.
yeah, just yes, just like blonde wig on broomstick. She just swept me out. I
Yeah,
thought that was very like uh lyrically creative. So like I'm curious if like in this deep dive after like kind of grunge, did you find yourself like in finding enjoying like a lot of like the power pop of there or the pop rock? Because I heard of that stuff on the
yeah.
radio all the time in between
Oh yeah,
Nirvana
yeah.
and Soundgarden.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, like it was really funny. Like I will still put on like Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, and like I still love that album a lot, and especially like the big hits from that. I'm like, anytime it comes on, I get excited. But because I'm 35 now and not 16 listening to it, like it doesn't hit this like the I don't have as much rage as I did then, so it is
Right.
funnier to like listen to it. So like I still, but I loved it because it's like there's like orchestral moments on that, and like that Billy Corgan, like just that guitar sound is on there. But like lyrically, like that sort of grungier sounding stuff, like it was more just like I can't pull off the kind of rage that I need. Like I think Billy Corgan has an amazing like angry singing voice, and the way that he flips between like his very like his Fleetwood Mac voice that he does on the Landslide cover to the like angry screaming part of Zero. Like those are two dynamics that I am not very capable of. Or the way Kurt Cobain like scream sings every single song except for a couple of those softer, as close to a ballad as Nirvana gets. Like I knew I wasn't going to be able to get to that, but I would listen to like yeah, some of that more like pop rock stuff, and it's like, okay, this is very, very 90s. Sixpence is a yeah, that's a really good example of that. The Breeders had like, even though they kind of were born out of the Pixies, like they had such a good like, the Deal sisters are like harmonizing with each other, and so it had that kind of like choral feeling, and so that was something I kind of pulled out of it. And my favorite band from the 90s, and like one of my favorite bands of all time that I have never gotten tired of listening to, has been REM. So I think like the twangy guitar and vocal harmony is definitely just like me going REM. And that's probably also why like I gravitated to like folk and these types of genres that are very much like three chord songs. Like they're even though there's plenty that are more complicated in there, but like they're very singer songwritery, and very melodic. And I also am working with my own limitations where I'm not the strongest singer, but I can write a good melody and have an interesting chord progression and try to you know have interesting song forms so that it's not just verse chorus bridge verse chorus like every song. Like I've become very conscious of like, oh, I'm just repeating the same form as that other song, let me just change it up here, and then I can cut an extra verse that isn't as strong as the others, and now it sounds different in the context of all of it. Hot Goss was actually really, really inspired by Dinosaur Jr. because they are very like heavy and like also I'm sure Jay Mascis, the guitarist, has his own Big Muff pedal out there as well, just like Billy Corgan and probably every 90s guitar player does. But his voice is so like almost weak. Like he almost has like a weak voice. He's always like mumbling, very, very quiet like this. And even on songs where he's like belting, like this is him belting, and it's like it's
Yeah.
very
Well, that's
subdued
just kind
and
of how he
monotone.
is all the time.
It is in interviews he's a little quieter, and that's the difference. Yeah, but like there's like a few songs where it just like comes in with this like just really compressed like uh angry sounding guitar, and a couple where they had like he's clearly playing a wah pedal but there's so much distortion that you can't hear the difference between like where the wah pedal is, but it's a little bit, so that was like a tone that I really wanted to use but not overuse, so I threw it in Hot Goss with that kind of instrumental intro. And then yeah, Blonde Wig on a Broomstick has like I think the most vocal harmonies going on, and it's part of that is also because I realized in doing some of my earlier albums before this year that a good way to compensate for not having a strong singing voice is to double your bad singing voice and then
Hmm.
add more layers to it, and then eventually they blend together better, and it hides the fact that I'm not a trained singer, or I don't have a you know a beautiful singing voice. And so and that really worked well on the genres I was doing here, because you could kind of add some like a little bit of processing on the synthier ones, like add a little like pitch correction, and it almost works better because it's got that like robotic phase there. But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, like the 80s, like the kind of synth pop ones, especially because you have a deeper singing voice, so it works almost
yeah,
like kind of have that new ordery post punk sort of
yep.
vibe to those. And the
That was a
nine.
struggle. That was a struggle because all my favorite singers are like these high pitched singers. Like even Michael Stipe is like very much like I guess he's like a baritone range, but he hits some really high notes and has like an incredible vocal range. And then you go into like the 70s, which was like all I was listening to in the 90s and 2000s. It's like, I'm never going to sing like Robert Plant. I'm never going to sing like Geddy Lee or John Anderson. Like all of my favorite singers were these like screaming, like, almost had like a soprano's range. They were singing so high. And I've had this very bottom register voice that similar to Frank Zappa also, who said like he's like I can really only sing like half an octave, so that's why so many Zappa songs are him like monotone talking over the music.
Uh-huh.
And I'm just so I'm maybe slightly, maybe I have like a full octave and not a half octave, but I related more to that, and so trying to like write around my own limitations there.
Yeah, well, you recognized your strengths, and you had techniques for that. So I commend you for I commend you for um that recognizing that. Um, I think that's a very important part of the creative process. That is the continual refinement and emphasizing of our strengths. I want to ask
Yeah.
you about some lyric stuff. So because the lyrics in these songs, like your synth pop song where you talked about some of our former peers have gone a little towards the dark side,
Hmm.
when it comes to stand up culturally. Before I get into some of the other lyrics, because you did an entire very honest album about the struggles of being a stand up comedian that has not been on TV, which I related
Hmm.
to very very much. The thing
I
that
got a lot
really
of messages from our from our friends who we were doing mics with back in the day, and like struggling at shows at clubs that don't exist anymore. And yeah, a lot of
yeah.
people were like, "Oof, I didn't expect this to hurt as much."
Oh no, I related, but at the same time I was like, I can't let him just I don't want him to completely walk away. I want him to
Yeah,
have
yeah,
some positivity. Like that's why like when we were driving to Vermont, I was like really like maybe I can pull him
yeah.
back from the abyss a little bit. Because I remember all those times we had, even the ones that all those, even though there were nights where it's like, oh, what this isn't the greatest. I was still having a great time the whole time we were all
Sure.
running around telling
Yeah.
jokes to each other and to people who listen to us. But the one song lyrically I want to talk about, because I don't know if anyone else you've talked to yet remembers this, but I vividly remember this Sears commercial from when I was a kid, and you made an entire song out of this Sears commercial.
I did. I did. There's a song called Yesterday You Said You'd Call Sears, and it is based on the Sears commercial from the 90s. It is such a defining like nostalgia moment, like whenever it always comes up, like every summer somebody shares it on social media, or it'll like I have a friend who performs. He does like a lot of electronic music under a few different names. So his name is Matt Scarpino. Check him out. He has some stuff under his real name, but then he also has some stuff under um, the name Uneven Steps, and then he has a few others that I can't keep track of anymore. And so I forget which alias it's under, but he had like a summer jam that he put together that just sampled the woman's or the husband saying to the wife, "Gonna be another scorcher," and he just like samples that and like makes a beat out of it, and he would make a different. He made a different another scorcher every summer as just like an ongoing bit, and he would share it. And he was a friend of mine from work, and so like I was the only one who really appreciated it. But yeah, that air conditioning commercial, I don't know why it's burrowed in. It has laid eggs in a certain subset of the millennial generation where like if you say like gonna be hot today, like yesterday you said you call Sears, like it just is in there, and I can't explain it. But yeah, when I was thinking of like things from the '90s to write about, yesterday you said you'd call Sears came up, and I just kind of, I don't know. I don't know exactly what started the lyrics, but I literally just like came up with a very melodramatic like rock interpretation of like really just the dialogue from the commercial, and plugged it into this like '90s rock song format.
Uh-huh.
I was really happy with it, and I added, and then some of the music on there is very like Jagged Little Pill with like the like phased out guitar riff in the background, but it's also kind of like Teenage Dirtbag. It has like that kind of like percussive beat going to it, so it's like a lot of like in my mind like very '90s songs, but then just wanted to. I basically did like Sears air conditioning commercial, the musical.
Yes, and also I feel like a lot of like great layering of electric and acoustic guitar. I really when I started thinking about that commercial again, now that as like a married person, I just related to it differently because of the number of times that I am supposed to have done something and or called somebody and
Oh yeah,
haven't done it
I'll
yet.
call now.
So,
Yeah,
yeah, so I feel I feel for that guy. But the couple in that commercial, I feel like they worked it out. So we
yeah.
have this so we
There is
have
an
this Oh,
Oh,
sorry, go ahead.
sorry. I've just no, just another reason why that commercial lives rent free in my head is a few years ago there was like at this point probably a decade ago, but there was a UCB mod team. I think they were called Goodbye Handsome, but I don't remember exactly. But they did a sketch that parodied the Sears air conditioning commercial where they literally just showed the beginning of the commercial and just goes like, yesterday you said you'd call Sears. I'll call today. You'll call now. And then that's where the like lights up on the actors. And he's like, I'll call today. You'll call now. And then the guy just looks at his wife and is like, what did you just say to me? And then it just devolves into a fight where they just start arguing about everything but the air conditioner. And occasionally they bring back their failing marriage to the air conditioning. And it's so like, it is such a angry, real sounding fight that every time they bring it back to the air conditioner, it like breaks everything down. So I think that's also where like the refrain in that chorus is like we both know what our biggest problem is just like in these two people's heads they are having the biggest fight of their life about an air conditioner, and it definitely comes from like my new reading on that commercial came from this sketch where they just like took it to an 11 immediately with how angry this couple is because it's so hot and they just want air conditioning.
Oh, dude, it makes so much difference. Like like I can just think of how many relationships or marriages can be saved with just a few basic comforts or conveniences. I bet
Yeah. And a
or
Kenmore air conditioner from Sears with 5 years warranty on parts and labor. Like that's all you need. It should be in everyone's wedding vows.
exactly. It'll just cover up all the other interpersonal issues that you might arise. They can just get cooled over with the sweet breeze of that AC. Um, thematically, lyrically, I'm curious to ask you about this because I I think what you do in terms of writing lyrics is very much in the tradition of comedy music that I know we grew up a lot on like your Dr. Demento's, Weird Al. That's sort of like wit. There's your clear wit from what I know you to do as a stand up runs through here. So I'm curious in where your head was, where you were mentally, because you're taking on like how everybody has a brand now. You're taking on like just kind of petty gossip, nepotism, annoying people online, uh, hippies. Then you got a great. You have the Smoking Kills has a great swerve. Really enjoyed that. Taking on like yeah, I'm guessing what your feel for movies is nowadays on some of these songs. Um, I'm curious, like, is there like a low key rage boiling in you amongst all these topics? And I say this in a joking way. I'm
Yeah, all the
curious.
time, all the time. It's yeah. There's, I mean, so here's the lyrics. Like, yeah, obviously, like, love Weird Al, and I love, you know, I love Weird Al's like genre parodies and like the style parodies, like the songs that are not a specific song, but they are, going after a certain style or a certain band style. Like, I love those, but I didn't necessarily want it to be like straight up novelty music with these. Like, I've even though it's the way I've been thinking about it is like, this is like serious music, and if you laugh, that's okay, that's your problem. But they
Mhm.
are meant to be funny, and like, like, they might be Giants or Ween. Like, they have very funny songs, but they're not necessarily like novelty. Or Sparks. Like, I've really gotten into Sparks the last couple of years since that Edgar Wright documentary came out about them.
Mhm.
And like, so many of their lyrics, like Ron Mail writes such funny lyrics, and they sometimes get pegged as like a novelty band. But yeah, like, my favorite song lyrics are by like Warren Zevon is one of my favorite songwriters, and he has some songs that are very like tragic and serious, but then he also has very funny songs. Like, I'll Sleep When I'm Dead is just him, like, ranting about like going out and partying and screaming "I'll sleep when I'm dead." Or he has a song called "For My Next Trick I'll Need a Volunteer," and it's just about a depressed magician who's trying to like find love, and he's like, I can. The chorus is, "I can make love disappear. For my next trick I'll need a volunteer." And it's just a magician saying like, "Hey, if you date me, it's gonna go badly." And it's like, it's sad, but it's also like very funny. And he had like, so that's like what I wanted to do. And a lot of the songs I write, like, they might get a little bit serious in there, but they're very like witty, tongue in cheek, however you want to say it. So, but honestly, like sometimes they're pointed at other people. A lot of times it's pointed at myself. Like, that's the brand. Yeah, it is making fun of like when people do, like, everybody does have a brand, but like the lyrics in that are specifically about like when I have gotten notes from other people that do not understand that like these are meant to be like funny, sarcastic lyrics, and people are like, oh, why don't, or people that don't get, like, oh, why are you just recording in your bedroom? Like, this would sound better if you brought it to like a proper mastering studio. I'm like, no, this is the brand, is that it's bedroom made music. Like, because a lot of the influence I took were also from like going down the rabbit hole of like outsider music, and like our
Yeah.
Stevie Moore and Gary Wilson, like recording, and Daniel Johnston, who all like recorded albums just like in their garages using like very low
Cassettes.
fidelity cassettes, if they were lucky cassettes. If you're like, if our Stevie Moore was like using two like TIAC reel-to-reels that he would just bounce one to the other, because that was all that was available in the 60s. Um and it's crazy, like, it was crazy. And like, they're low fidelity, but like the songwriting's really good, and the songs are really catchy, and that's what I chose to focus on. But yeah, some people I've gotten feedback that are like, oh, I listened to your album, some constructive feedback. I'm like, no, 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 not looking for feedback. Thank you for listening. Keep it moving. I don't need,
Right.
unsolicited feedback is one thing. Like, yeah, friends who are like, oh, like, it's different if like a friend is giving unsolicited feedback, because it's like, oh, like, we know each other. But when it's just strangers on the internet like commenting, I'm like, oh, I don't need to hear from that. Or it's clear that they just didn't get like what the aesthetic was. And then some people like really get it, and they are, there are a handful of weirdos that are actual like fans of what I do, which is cool. not diehard fans, but like I'll put a new video up for a song, and there's like the same two people that are like, always love a new Goodbye Charlemagne video, and I'm like, as long as one other person does, but otherwise I'm really just making these fully aware that I'm probably going to be listening to them more than anyone else in the world, and that's fine. Um, yeah, but even like hot goss, like that's also making fun of me because I love gossiping, and I also know that like there's like a little turn at the end of it where the whole song is about like just yum yum yum. I want hot goss. Put it in my tummy. I love it. And then like there's like a line at the end that's like if I'm feeling dissatisfied, like gossiping about other people makes me feel better. I'm like, yeah, I do that. Like I'm a bad person when it comes to that, and I'm calling myself out on it. And so yeah, a lot of the songs are like that, and then there's some songs that are just completely kind of making fun of other people, like rich parents. I do not have rich parents, and you and I both know plenty of people in comedy, especially, but in creative spaces in general, that it's like they had such a leg up because they had rich parents, and they just are like, oh, but I also worked hard and I got a internship, and they're like, who is the internship with? And they're like, oh, Martin Scorsese because he's my godfather, and so like I made that one up, but it is like in the lyrics of that song is like somebody who's so not aware of the privilege they have because of who their family is. And that was not
Right.
about me, but it is about the people that we've met at open mics, and like we both struggled at day jobs, and when we were roommates, we were both like just hoping that the rent check cleared every month, and doing
Yeah.
what we could to just like but and then there would be some people that their rent was paid by their parents, and they could do a million open mics and get on shows every week because they didn't have a job to go to the next day, so it didn't matter that they were exhausted, and they could sleep in until 3 and then go out. And so that's yeah, that song easily could have been on the album I did about doing stand-up comedy as well, but I just didn't hadn't written it yet. And then blonde wig on a broomstick. That was just a phrase that I thought of that made me laugh. And there's no deeper meaning. It's just a song about a guy who thinks he's met the love of his life, but it turns out somebody just put a wig on a broomstick and he thought it was a woman. It was. I think that was also like a throwaway joke I had written in a sketch once, where like a guy just sees a broom from far away and thinks it's a beautiful woman, and then blonde wig on a broomstick just has a nice pop to it, and so I built a whole song around it. And the movies one, I enjoy movies more, but yeah, there's a lot of. I used to hate going to movies when I was a kid because, or once I got, or one it was because I didn't have the attention span. I would
Mhm.
get bored at movies really, really easily until I got really into comedy, and then I had an attention span to watch like 90-minute comedies, and like Superbad and The Hangover were all kind of coming out, and that was like early college when I was like, oh, I can sit through this movie and I enjoy this. But I was also like, you can relate to this. I was like a tall, gangly kid, and movie theater seats before they invented these beautiful recliners that can fit a whole adult man. You were just like, it was so uncomfortable. You couldn't lean back. My neck would hurt every time. And so I hated it. And I went to the Paris Theater to see Lawrence of Arabia this year.
Uh-huh.
And Lawrence of Arabia, it is a beautiful film and it is a breathtaking movie to see on a big screen, but it is 4 hours long, and it was in a very old school movie theater. So it was that whole song was like what I wrote during like in my head during the intermission. It's so long it has an intermission
Oh my
of
god.
like everything that I used to hate about going to the movies in this one place. Except I enjoyed Lawrence of Arabia. It's worth seeing, but yeah, I've realized I write music the same way I wrote jokes or sketches, which was like I have a notebook or a Word document or like a note in my phone or something where it's like I will think of something, and it's usually just like one line, and it's basically like here's a pitch, and it's usually one thing that kind of annoys me, and I'll write that down. And then so like I had like a running list going for the last all year, but like since I started doing music, of just like a list of song pitches essentially, and I just sort of picked things out as they kind of like inspired a chorus or a line of some sort, and sort of built it around that, and then it usually turns into something, usually making fun of myself or calling myself out on something, unless it's something like Rich Parents, where it's like I have enough experience making fun of trust fund kids because of comedy.
Oh yeah, of course, and that's nobody's going to be terribly sympathetic to that crew. So,
No, no. And
under
the
his
people who
banner
get
name.
mad, it's like, good, you should be mad. So I like a song where the right people are getting mad at it. So
No, absolutely, because it's fun to piss off the right
yeah,
people.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I have that instinct as well. The non edge lord comedian instinct to fuck with the audience sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Um, One other thing I'd love to ask you. So the album comes out December 1st. A couple more things I'd love to ask before we get out here. Why the stage name for the music?
Um, well, I've been performing comedy as Kevin Froleiks for a long while, and it wasn't really working for me. So um, it's I mean, I never wanted to have a stage name for stand up because it like I was like I don't know what to tell you. This is my name, and stand up is like it is at least the way the kind of stand up I was mostly doing. It was very like not like personal stories or whatever, but I was like I'm not playing a character. This is just me maybe telling stories about myself, but these are at least like thoughts that I've had, and it would be weird if I like invented a whole other name and like even I even thought of doing that. So like some people will do like the first and middle name, and so like my middle name is Andrew, and I was like, oh, I could do Kevin Andrews, and I was like, that's not me. Like that doesn't feel like me, but
Yeah.
and then I did like when I did the first couple of music albums, like I did them under my own name, but I would like every time I saw it, I was like, that's not a that's not a musician's name. Like nobody can pronounce Frolix, nobody knows how to spell it. So I was like, maybe I'll switch. And then once I like kind of got better and was like, I wanted to do an album, and I was like listening to it, I was like, oh, this is so much better than like the previous ones that I've done, and it's not just these like quirky little folk songs like the. So I wanted to come up with like a band name essentially, um, and I just made a list of so many potential names, and nothing really made sense, and nothing was clicking. I was like, oh, references to like weird TV shows that I like, and so I was coming. I had a bunch of band names that were like references to Adventures of Pete and Pete or Stella or these other or like Strangers with Candy that like just like things that it's like, oh, it'll be a fun inside joke for me, but like none of them really felt right. Or in the case of most of the Pete and Pete references I came up with, there is already a band name using that. Whatever Adventures in Pete and Pete reference you're thinking of, there's probably a band name under it. Most disappointingly was somebody had already taken. There were like three Orange Lazaruses, and I was like, oh, that would have been a good one.
Yeah, that's a good one.
But yeah, so Goodbye Charlemagne then came from once I realized like, oh, I can't reference anything because like it's probably been taken or there's a version of it out. I don't know. So I was just thinking of like just inside jokes with like friends of mine and like thinking about like what are some of the funniest things that happened like as a kid. And then like when I thought of Goodbye Charlemagne, I was like, oh, that's perfect because then there's also a really funny story about it that I could. I've only performed live on stage a couple times, but I have like a bit about like here's the origins of the name Goodbye Charlemagne, which was, in my mind, this is like the funniest thing that I've ever seen anybody do. And I have watched stand up comedians, I've watched a million funny movies, and I've seen people do elaborate bits and pranks on people. And this is still the funniest thing. And it was like 1999 or 2000, like whenever I was in seventh grade, and I still think about it constantly, which is why I picked it. But in seventh grade history class, my teacher was teaching us about King Charlemagne, who was the first Holy Roman Emperor, anointed by Pope Leo, and the reason I still remember that he was the Holy Roman Emperor and who he was anointed by is because of this. What the teacher did was he came out and he was like, guys, we're going to learn about Charlemagne today. And I have something that I think is really going to help. And so, okay, so guys, there was a monk back in Charlemagne's time who actually invented recorded music. And he actually figured out a way to get music, to get the human voice recorded onto blades of grass and then play them. And he basically built a needle out of what he had available in the monastery and was able to play music off of these blades of grass. And this one song, a song that this monk wrote about King Charlemagne, was preserved. They found it in this sealed off wall in a monastery, and they were able to get it onto a cassette tape, and it's at the museum. And so I was able to get it from the museum, but guys, I shouldn't even have this right now. He went into detail for 5 minutes about how he had a recording from like 900 AD when Charlemagne was king that was originally recorded on blades of grass by an old medieval monk and then was stolen from a museum. And he kept looking over his shoulders like there might be like Secret Service in the trees. Like I should not have this, but it is the best way to learn about Charlemagne, I think. And I'm going to play the tape for you right now. And then he put the tape in a little like very 90s like boombox.
Mhm.
And it was just Elton John's Candle in the Wind. But he had used like the dub feature on the boombox to dub in himself yelling facts about Charlemagne. So after 5 minutes of setting up that he had this medieval song, totally straight faced. We are 12 years old. We trust every adult implicitly. Like, we have no reason to think he's lying. Even though he was the funny teacher and he made us laugh every single day. But this was like so much setup for him to just press play and you hear the piano and then Elton John comes in and goes, goodbye. And instead of goodbye, Norma Jean, it comes in, goodbye, Charlemagne. May you ever be the first Holy Roman Emperor anointed by Pope Leo. And it was the entire song, and he had just clumsily dubbed in himself screaming into it because that was the way you did overdubs back then, was you would press the dub button on your boombox. And
I
that
remember.
song's like, yeah, that song's like 5 minutes long. And just he dubbed in every now and then. Elton John would cut out and the music would also cut out. And it was just our teacher like muffled screaming into the onboard mic on a boombox. And so the first line, because it was Goodbye Charlemagne, and I was like, that's a good band name. It sounds like a band name. It's funny. It's also still a little hard to pronounce and spell, so I can keep that part of my identity. But yeah, but it's at least like a fun story for me to tell because it's so funny and so stupid. And that was really important to me, was that it needed to be a little stupid sounding for the music that I knew I was going to be making.
Which I think is, to bring this full circle, that's the, when I think of you and your work, that's the brand. That's
That's the
smart and
good
stupid.
job. That
That's
is that has always been the brand. Is if I can do something like, oh, like I'm writing music and I'm focusing on like audio levels and oh the decibels on it. Like there's a level of intelligence that you need to have to like learn a song, write a song, record the song, and then for all of that to just be the equivalent of my teacher just screaming facts about Charlemagne into a boombox. That is the that is the brand that I hope to have for people.
I mean, I think it's a pretty effective way to draw attention. I feel like people who listen to this are going to want to go and listen to this album. So the
I
album
hope they
is going to be
do.
called, so it's called We Have Your Son, but Please Take Him Back. It's out December 1st. Where else can people find you if they want to check out your stuff?
It'll be on all the streaming stuff. So Bandcamp, Spotify, Amazon Music, Deezer, Tidal, they're on all of those. And yeah, it's Goodbye Charlemagne. One annoying thing, and if anybody here has any pull with Tim Cook over at Apple, for whatever reason, Apple and iTunes still has everything under Kevin Froleiks. So you can also search my name, Kevin Froleiks, if you're on Apple Music. But I have been fighting with them for a year to change it, and they are having a crazy technical difficulty for a very fixable thing. But yeah, it's on all. I'm on all the streaming. Maybe someday I'll do physical releases, but I would be making physical releases just for myself at this point. So it's all digital. But yeah, Goodbye Charlemagne is on all of your favorite streaming services.
Well, dude, fantastic! Congrats on 4 albums in a year, and it's great to chat with you again. And look forward to seeing what we do next. I hope our
Yeah.
paths intersect in a performance sense in some way.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, thanks for having me on and always being a good pal and always being willing to talk music and comedy and all that fun stuff. And yeah, likewise. I hope you're working on another big show that I can come see.
Absolutely, I'll let you know, man. Thank you again.
Cool. See you, Will.
Kevin and I have known each other for a very long time, and to see my friend continue to find new modes of creativity and new avenues of inspiration, and to be a really eclectic songwriter and lyricist covering a lot of different styles is very exciting to see. Kevin's newest album under the name Goodbye Charlemagne, We Have Your Son, but Please Take Him Back, is available now wherever you get your music. It is out as of December 1st. Check links in the description, and you can also follow Kevin at Kevin Froleiks on Instagram as well as Threads. And if you enjoyed this podcast and think you know a friend who would be interested in listening to it as well, you can send them to awesomedisaster.com. We are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Pandora, everywhere you get your podcasts. If you want to give us a subscribe, follow, let other people know that this is a cool show worth cool times for cool people. That would be tremendously helpful to me. You can follow me on Instagram at WillCarey23, at WillCarey23 on Threads as well. And I'm also on TikTok under at Comic Will Carey. And if you want to go a little bit further in support of the show, you can also check out our Patreon as well as our merch store, where the links are available also at awesomedisaster.com. May you continue to go through this holiday season with the most minimal amount of adversity and the maximum amount of joy. And check out me and my wife Chelsea's podcast, the Hallmark After Show podcast, where we dissect this year's Hallmark Christmas movies. Thank you all again so much for being here, and I will see you next time between awesome and disaster. Stay safe, get vaccine boosted, and stomp out fascism. Take care, everybody.